morning. Oh, they will? Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, louder. By the way, you can call me Holly. I'm a first name basis kind of person. I got to move this because I'm also a walker when I talk, so I needed some space. I'm a first name basis kind of person, so please call me Holly. I'm excited to be here this morning. I see some Westmont people in a few areas. So for some of you who are at Westmont, if you've seen me teach before, I teach New Testament there, then some of what I do might sound a little familiar, especially this first piece I would like to invite all of us to do together. I would like to invite you to imagine with me, like this. Are we ready to imagine? We need to practice it, yeah. And sometimes it helps if you go like this and close your eyes. We're going to imagine that we are first century people living in Ephesus. So what is our place like? What are our lives like? We're first century people living in Ephesus. We're short people. We're short, definitely. Around 5 feet tall, all of us. Let's see. We have dark skin, dark hair, dark eyes. Probably most of the men have beards. What else? Let's see. Our city is big. From first century standards, huge, actually, massive. Maybe 250,000 people. Diverse. Urban, busy, loud. Because we're on 2 big trade routes, both by water and land, people have come to our place, and maybe we've come there from all over the Roman Empire. There are lots of different kinds of people. We have 2 huge marketplace areas, a massive stadium, a theater that we think in the first century could seat 25,000 people with amazing acoustics. We know what we're doing when we build stuff, so. One of the diverse things about our world is the many, many gods that we worship here in Ephesus. Because we've come from all over, we've brought our gods from all over. And there are many gods. Any kind of god you could imagine or choose is there. The most important one, though, in Ephesus is a female goddess, actually, named Artemis. She has a massive temple structure. It dominates our entire landscape. It's 4 times the size of the Parthenon in Athens. And people come from all over the ancient world to visit it, to visit her, to worship her. It's one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. In this complex place, Paul comes. This Jesus follower, this Jewish Jesus follower. Most of us wouldn't be Jews, by the way. Some Jews. Most of us would be non-Jews. But this Jewish Jesus follower guy comes to our place and starts telling us about the true God. That's what he argues for, the only one. Who's, by the way, the biggest, most awesome one also. It's appropriate. And many of us buy into that. We think he's right. The question is, what next? What now? Okay, open your eyes if you have them closed. Oh, I'm facing over here now. I didn't realize that. I'm sorry. I was in it. I was in my imaginary world. I wish we could all visit Ephesus together. I wish I could do this in the middle of the ruins of Ephesus. Maybe someday you can come with me and we'll do it together. So here we are. We're these communities of followers of Jesus who live in this part of the world, in the Roman Empire. And we get this letter from Paul. The letter is structured in ways that are supposed to be really meaningful for us because this is our place and our location. The first half of the book of Ephesians, which we're going to be in today, the first 3 chapters, are what I would call all of the sort of theoretical stuff, where that's where Paul argues again. I mean, we've heard this before, but Paul argues again that God has this cosmic plan of salvation. It's cosmic. I mean, that's how big it is. It covers everything. And it's about restoring and unifying everything. The whole world. People too, though. People are part of that too. And Paul really needs to argue that, remind us of that again, because sometimes we forget and we start thinking Artemis is the cosmic savior of the world who's working to do stuff. And Paul has to say, no, not Artemis. Not the fertility goddess. Jesus. Jesus is the ultimate cosmic one. So he argues this, and he says what this means is that the followers of Jesus should be unified no matter what your ethnic background is. That's a major theme in the letter. No matter where you come from, unified in and through Jesus. And John will stress that this morning. So that's the first 3 chapters. In chapters 4 to 6, he asks the practical question. Okay, in light of all of that, what does that mean now for how we live? What do we do? If it is true that the cosmic plan of God is to unify, restore, recreate all of us and this whole world, how do we live that out? What are practical things we can do? So he starts chapter 4 by saying, and John talked about this last week, these verses, as a prisoner for the Lord then, we think Paul's in prison at this point, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Live it. Live it out. And the bar is high. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient. Bearing with one another in love, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. He stresses unity, and he talks about how there's one God and one Spirit and one church. And there are a lot of ones in there. One, we're all together in and through Jesus. Then in verse 7, he starts a related but kind of new section. It's related to what he's already said, but he goes off in a different area, in a slightly different direction, and says, to each one of us, grace has been given as Christ apportioned it. To each one of us, grace has been given. And what Paul means by grace here isn't just some kind of generic, random, vague idea of grace where you can just sort of take it as you wish. He clarifies what that grace looks like in the lives of each one of these believers, each one of us in first century Ephesus, or I would argue each one of us in 21st century Santa Barbara. What does the grace look like? Verse 8, he says, this is why it says, and then he quotes from the Old Testament, from the book of Psalms, which Paul loves to do. Quotes from the Hebrew scriptures, the Jewish scriptures. When he ascended on high, he took many captives and gave gifts to his people. So what is being given here by God? Gifts. The grace that Paul mentions in verse 7 takes the form specifically of gifts in verse 8. So not just random grace, but the grace of a gift, a specific gift for you. For me as a first century Ephesian. For you as a 21st century person. And that's supposed to be amazing and crazy and powerful and beautiful. And he's going to try to convince us that that's true for the rest of the passage. Then he goes off in typical Pauline fashion in verses 9 and 10 on a little random aside. So Paul. My Bible, my translation here puts it in parentheses as a way to tell us. We think this is Paul kind of just getting a little excited, and he goes off here for a minute, and then he says, whoa, got to come back. Okay, I'm over here. This is very Paul. I love Paul for this. You can feel his passion coming through. Paul says, what does he ascended mean? Because the passage from Psalm says he ascended on high. Paul says, what does that mean? Except that he also descended to the lower earthly regions. Came here. He who descended is the very one who ascended higher than all the heavens in order to fill the whole universe. Remember, one of Paul's big points in this letter is the cosmic piece. Jesus is the biggest, best, most awesome, fabulous one, the cosmic one, not Artemis, not other gods that you have options for. Jesus is that one. So it's like Paul can't resist here taking another opportunity to make that clear, in case we've forgotten in the last 30 seconds. Jesus is that one. Oh, and then it's like he realizes, oh, never mind, I was talking about gifts. Okay, I'm back with my gifts. Verse 11. So if you've ever had me in class, Westmont students, you know that sometimes I like participation. So I'm wondering if I could get a Westmont student up here to read our passage for us, verses 11 to 16. Anyone? I have a mic for you. Hello.
Check, check.
Thank you. Multiple voices. You can read from down there, or you can come up here. Okay. You can read from the screen, or you can read from your translation, whatever you
I'll
choose.
stick with the screen.
Okay.
Okay.
It was he who gave some to be apostles, some to be prophets, some to be evangelists, and some to be pastors and teachers, to prepare God's people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up, until we all reach unity in faith and in knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. Then we will no longer be infants tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of men in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will in all things grow up into him who is the head, that is Christ. From him the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work.
Thank you. Let's give her a hand. Thank you. Okay. So this is our passage that we're focusing on today. This is the text I was given, but I couldn't help myself and do a little bit of the pre-work. It's in my nature to say, how does this section fit in the whole chapter of what Paul's doing here? Oh, and then in the whole book. Because guess what? If we were first century Ephesians, when we get this letter from Paul, we would encounter this text as a whole. Because most of us couldn't read or write. Yes, bless our hearts. I know, most of us couldn't read or write. So someone among us who was actually privileged enough to be able to do that would read for us and we would listen. And we would hear it all together as a whole and make all kinds of connections, which is pretty exciting and awesome. Okay, so in verse 11, Paul says, so Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and teachers. So following his argument, he says in verse 7, Jesus gave grace to each one of us, each one of you. What does that grace look like? That grace looks like a specific gift. What are the gifts? Here Paul mentions these 5: apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. There's been a lot of discussion about these passages with people who do what I do for a living. People have said, oh my, what are these exactly? And what about other places in Paul's letters where he mentions other gifts? Because he does. What do we do with these 5 here? Are there only 5? There don't seem to be only 5 because he mentions others in places like 1 Corinthians 12. So what do? I would say, okay, it's pretty hard to number exactly the gifts. I would never want to nail it down and say only these, no more. Spirit of God, you are not allowed ever to do anything beyond this parameter. I will say, though, that I think it is significant that Paul mentions these 5 here. So I would want to say at least these 5, obviously more than this. Paul's point here seems to be that each person has one of these. Some people have said, no, not each person, only the leaders, only the special people. I would say a few things in response to that. Verse 7 says, to each one of us, grace has been given. It doesn't seem to specify just leaders here. In verse 12, it says, the point of these gifts is to equip his people for works of service, but we can see that in 2 different ways. You can see it as a unilateral thing, just coming from a group to another group, or you can see it in this kind of way, equipping each other, building each other up, which is, by the way, how Paul ends the passage. Leadership in the New Testament, anyway, is not like this. It's more of a this. It's really diffused and messy, and there are leaders at all kinds of levels. Are you a leader? I bet you are. All right, let's talk about these gifts for a few minutes. Apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. What are these? My best answer to that is that we can't know definitively, completely. So I guess we're done here. I'll see you later. No, I'm just kidding. Nowhere does Paul detail it for us and say, I'm going to tell you exactly what the gift of apostle is. Give me 10 verses to explain it to you. He doesn't do that anywhere in the New Testament. No one does. However, we're not left with nothing. What we can do is look at places in the New Testament where people are said to have this gift, one of these gifts, and we can see what they do with it. How are they described? What kinds of actions, activities do they have? So that's what I've done for you. And I'm going to share some of that with you here right now. Apostles. When we see people get called apostle in the New Testament, what we see is the sort of big picture visionary person. The person who's always 5 steps ahead of everyone else. The person who can see, who can taste what God might want to do over there. I think God wants to do something over there, in that new place, in that new space, with that new people group. That's where the gospel needs to go. We should help God with that. Apostles can be frustrating to be around sometimes because they're always ahead of you. You feel like, hey, what are you doing way up there? Get back here. But the New Testament says these are important people. They keep the church looking forward so we all don't just sit around and look at ourselves in the moment and say, oh, we're awesome as it is. Apostles say, where does the good news about Jesus need to go next? Big picture. The impulse is to move. Prophets, when we see prophets in the Bible, what do they do? This is a good one because people have often said, well, when we look at prophecy in the Old Testament, prophets are the ones who predict the future. They say this is going to happen, and then it happens. Boom. And I would say sometimes, yes, sometimes they do that. Actually, what we see prophets doing more often is critiquing the people of God in the present, as opposed to just future. In other words, prophets seem to have a special kind of connection to God where they can hear God's voice and then speak for God to the community. And what that speaking looks like usually is the critique piece, the faithfulness piece, where prophets say, hey, church, hey, people of God, God cares about this thing, whatever it is, and you are not caring about it. You are not living it well. You are not doing a good job. You need to. God wants you to. So prophets can make people feel uncomfortable because they point out those things that we don't always necessarily want to hear. Prophets also, by the way, often care about justice issues. God cares so deeply about justice, and it's almost always the prophets in the Bible who say, church, work for justice in this area. The evangelists. This is a tricky one because not very many people get described as evangelists. We don't have as much to work with. However, there's this guy named Philip in the book of Acts, which is my favorite book, the best one in the entire New Testament. Ephesians is a close second, but Acts is my favorite one. We see that this guy named Philip, he gets called an evangelist. What does he do? He is someone who takes the good news about Jesus to people who've never heard it before. He seems to have a natural gift for explaining Jesus to them, introducing them to Jesus and who Jesus is and what Jesus has accomplished and what that might mean for their lives. So the evangelists seem to be people who are good, have a natural gift at communicating Jesus to people who aren't Christians in ways that make sense. They invite them in. Hey, you want to meet this Jesus guy? Come check it out. Come check out the Jesus community. See what we do. Let's see. Evangelists, pastors. Oh, you could also call these people shepherds. Actually, I did something, and I told the group who's working back with the kids this morning, I told them that I looked, actually, in the New Testament to see every place this word shows up in the Greek, because the New Testament's written in Greek, because I wanted to see how it got translated. And in the entire New Testament, the only place where this word gets translated as pastor is here. Every other time it shows up, it gets translated as shepherd. It gets used of real shepherds. In Luke 2, when the shepherds come and see Jesus after he's born as a baby, in that story, that famous Christmas story, this is the word. When Jesus says things like, I am the good shepherd, this is the word. So this is actually really helpful because we can say, well, if shepherding is a gift, what do shepherds do? They protect. They nurture. They develop. They encourage. They build between various sheep/people, relationships and connections to keep everyone together. That's what shepherds do. That's what the gift seems to be like in the New Testament. One of my mentors used to say all the time, he used to say, Holly, in a group of 10 Christians, I hope there are 3 or 4 or 5 people with the shepherding gift, because there's a lot of encouragement and nurturing and protection and discipling that needs to happen in a group of 10, and one person can't hope to do that by themselves. We need a lot of people who can do that and take care of each other. And I've thought about that so much since he said that to me. Well, so many times. That's probably partly why I've thought about it so much. Finally, teachers. What do teachers do? Well, what we see happening in the Bible is Teachers tend to be teaching people, the people of God, not just about anything generically, but in light of this gift, teaching people about what God has already revealed. So teachers do a lot of reminding, clarifying, explaining. Jesus teaches about himself often. People in the New Testament after Jesus often teach about Jesus to other people. And our best source for who Jesus was and is, he was a first century person and the cosmic Lord. Wrap your mind around that, right? Who Jesus was and is, well, what has he accomplished? What does that mean? The New Testament is a great source, our best kind of written source for that, for understanding those questions about Jesus. Can we know Jesus personally? Do we? Should we? Of course. Does my personal relationship with Jesus exhaust everything there is to know about him? This book would say, hey, there's more. And teachers are the ones who passionately, deeply care about the church, the people of God, understanding that, understanding the Bible, being true to it. Teachers are the wisdom seekers. So that's verse 11. I want to quickly say a couple of things about the rest of the passage, and then I need my special helper. The point of all these gifts isn't for people to feel great about themselves, like, oh my word, I have such a good gift. Yay me. I love my gift. Or it's not either to say, oh, I have the teaching gift and I want to be an apostle. The apostles are the best ones. That's exactly the opposite of the point. The point is that all these gifts work together for what? For building up the community, for equipping the rest of us. We equip each other for works of service. That's what Paul says in verse 12. Until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature. End goal is community, unity, maturity. Growing up in Jesus. And we do that together. And Paul seems to be saying here that we can't do that unless we have these gifts operating, unless people are actually contributing their gifts. If we don't do that as individuals, then we as a whole won't ever grow up in Jesus the way that we need to. So that's what's at stake here, is the whole group. He warns against immaturity in verse 14. He says, then, if we do this, we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves, and blown here and there by every wind of teaching, and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. That was a very real danger in the first century. I'm a first century person. I miss Artemis and some of the cool stuff that she does and is as a goddess. Maybe I can combine her somehow with Jesus. Do both. That would be cool. Let's try that. No. Paul says no. It means in a church like ours that every time there's something cool and new that comes along, we need to weigh that out. We need to have the apostles, people with the apostolic gift, say, hey, does this cool new thing, whatever it is, fit with where we could envision the gospel going next, to a certain people group, to a certain kind of culture, to a certain place. We need the prophets to critique and say, I have questions about that cool new thing. I don't know. Will that bring us to faithfulness? We have evangelists. We need evangelists to say, well, that cool new thing, whatever it is, bring people to Jesus because that's what it's all about. And that doesn't happen when we all don't contribute our gifts. Verse 15, instead, speaking the truth in love, we will in all things grow up into him who is the head, that is Christ. From him, the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. This might be my favorite part of the whole passage because of what Paul does here with the body metaphor. He says, we're the body and Jesus is the head. What I love about it is that Paul didn't create that. Other people in the first century were using that language, the body language, but you know how they used it? They said, we're going to use this as a way to keep people in their place. So the important people, the high status people, the wealthy people, you get to be a hand. Being a hand is pretty good, especially right hand. Left hand, not as much. Left hand does some dirty business, but right hand, yes. Other people, though, what do you get to be? You get to be a toenail. You get to be an armpit. And don't forget that you're an armpit. You might want to be a hand, but you're not. You're an armpit. And Paul blows that out of the water and uses the body metaphor as a way to say, no, everyone is part of this, and we need all the parts to function together to build us all up and bring us to maturity in Jesus. Special helper. Max and I last night were saying, this is my husband, Max. We have about 5 minutes, I think. Max and I last night were saying, if every one of us who's a Christian has one of these gifts, do we all know it? We don't think so. We process what we think ours might be. That's fun.
That was easy.
When your husband, your spouses have a certain perspective on you. That can be helpful and interesting to hear in many ways. So we were processing what we think our primary gifts are, and then we started processing with about some of the people we know in this community. So we'd like to do a bit of that here with you, do a little bit of back and forth dialogue, and give you a sense of what it could look like as you are discerning your own gift. If you have no idea what it is, what could it look like for you to figure that out? And once you figure it out, to really contribute it well. So, honey,
Yes.
Let's take them in Paul's order.
Okay.
Apostle, gift of apostle. Who in here do you think might have that gift?
Could you remind me? I wasn't really paying. I was thinking on other things.
He was ahead of me 2 or 3 or 4 steps. Okay. Apostles are the big picture visionaries, the ones who can envision, who can see where the gospel might need to go into a new place, new space, big picture.
Well, I think Jeff Schaefer, are you here today? I don't know. I didn't see you when you were walking in. Right here. Yeah. Right here. Jeff Schaefer, also leading a group through Oceanhills right now. I think has modeled this gift for how long now? I mean, you should just talk to him about his crazy adventures throughout this whole city. Always seeing where something else is and how to develop it. But what's really cool, I think, and what really makes this gift, I think, very obvious in what he does is it's an empowerment model where he sets it up to the point where it sustains itself, and then he can back off because he's already thinking about something different. And he's ready to move on to the next project. And when that project's up and going, he's off to do something else because he's already 2-3 steps ahead. And with people like that, and now that you've partnered with this church, we're going to be doing that here too, which I'm super excited about.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that sounds like the apostolic gift. And to be honest, I think, honey, that I would say you probably have the apostolic gift. You are always...
Well, we are the best.
That's against Paul's point. That's the opposite of Paul's point.
I know. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Just kidding.
Always a few steps ahead, always envisioning what God might do, big picture. I mean, Max isn't down here in the details. He's up here in the big picture kind of idea, and he wants to recruit you for it. That's what apostles do. All right, prophet. Maybe we should just do one because I don't want to run out of time.
Okay.
Prophet.
What's a prophet?
Prophets seem to have a special kind of connection to God, and God speaks through them to the church, often with voices of critique, often with social justice concerns.
A couple people come to mind. I think you have an awesome quote, though, from the Rhodey family. What did Tara, she shared that with you at the lunch?
Well, with everyone
Or
at the
brunch.
women's brunch. Tara, are you here?
No.
No.
Jeff stepped out.
Jeff, oh.
I know.
She talked about how when she held her first baby in her arms, her heart was broken when she thought about all the babies in the world who don't get held and loved.
So she
There's
doesn't
something
just,
wrong with that.
and she didn't just say it. Then the family then becomes a foster family,
Yeah.
and they bring in babies, and they brought in several babies, and that's just an amazing gift.
Is that a justice issue that God cares about? Yes. Yeah.
Rhodeys.
Good. Let's see. Next, evangelist. Who might be an evangelist?
What are they? They
Natural gift is to
bringing people in.
Isn't this fun? This is so fun. Okay.
I am not a teacher.
Evangelists have a natural gift of communicating Jesus to people who
Yeah.
aren't Christians, introducing people to Jesus, saying, hey, Jesus, meet him, encounter him for your life, see what that means for how you live.
Yeah, I think a few people come to mind. Your dad comes to mind with what he does and how he lives his life, but I think even more prominent to this community, I think John Ireland actually fits that mold. And I think it's all summed up in that one quote where there's no perfect people. I mean, the whole motif is, he wants to bring people in at whatever level and have them participate. It doesn't matter if they know the gospel, if they know Jesus, or if they even know themselves. They're all welcome and they're all a part of that.
Yeah, he does. I would see him caring deeply about making Jesus understandable for anyone, if you have no background at all. These are definitive, by the way. These our judgment calls up here, definitive. Yeah,
Write
thank
that
you.
down.
Thank you, Priscilla. No, we're just processing a little bit
write
here
that
in
down.
community. So if we have two more.
Two more.
Evangelists, the shepherds, and then the teachers.
Shepherds.
Shepherds, the nurturers, the protectors, the disciplers.
Well, if we're going quick, I know I have one, but you have a better one when we talked about it because of the way they checked in with you.
There's this woman named Delina in this church. Delina, are you here? She is. When we were brand new here and we felt anonymous and invisible, Delina checked in with me every time she saw me. Holly, hi. And she would remind me of her name, which was helpful because I had learned 1,000 names, tried to learn 1,000 names. She'd say, Delina, how are you? How are things? Are you finding friends? Are you making connections? What's your week been like? She did all of that with me every time she saw me and helped me feel visible instead of invisible. That kind of impetus, that's the pastoral gift, the shepherding gift, I think. Teachers.
Well, despite the obvious one. I think we have another one. I think some of the youth in the church would agree, though, too, with the teaching gift to Lila DiGiulio. I don't know if Lila's here.
Not here.
No, this would have been cooler to point people out and put them on the spot like Jeff. But Lila has this gift of having this passion, this devotion to helping students figure out what this Bible is all about. Why is it relevant? How is it going to affect your life? What are you going to do with it now that you're becoming an adult and leaving and maturing? And I think that's just something that she's got, much like you, of course. Right?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Well, caring passionately about the Bible and people understanding it, seeking wisdom in it, yes, I would say. So what do we do with this? I mean, we need to close. We are over our time.
Not my fault.
What do we do with this?
Well,
we want people to use their gifts. Why? So we can be cool? No.
No.
So we can edify each other, grow up into who we are supposed to be in Jesus together. That's why.
And it's not, in what we're doing here, modeling this idea, we're hoping isn't like we're name dropping certain people and you guys are the best and everyone else, sorry. It's to model it in a way that says, look, if you go and have a small group, if you go have friends and family members, if you can go for coffee or drinks, you can have these types of conversations, not about other people. We talk about all of you, I hope your ears are burning, but in a way that says, look, we have this gift. There are things that we can do to be a part of this community, and it's super easy for me to self-identify, whatever one I really like. It's harder when somebody else speaks into what they see coming out of me, and how that gift then can be shared. And what's really important is that when we figure that out, we actually use it together. And the more vocal we are, the more we do it in community, the more we can hold each other accountable for those gifts. Because I can have a gift and not really ever tell anyone, and then I don't have to do anything about it. And I don't think that's the point of what Paul is saying. And so what we're going to do, I think, to close, since we're in a hurry to do that, is you guys have another song? What I think we'd like to do is actually not pray now, but bring the prayer team down front and and we'll be down front to pray as well. And we're going to allow the shepherds to pray over you, to use their gift, to maybe help you understand what your gift is, to ask God to speak into what you might have, how you could use it. So if you guys want to come up, and if the prayer team could come down, and we could do this all together, and to do it in a way that celebrates what it is that we can offer this community, it's pretty awesome. So should we do that?
Yes.
Can we do that?
John.
All right. I won't use a mic.
So this is your time, personal reflection, prayer in front, to at least start this process in our community in this way.